Now we're going to learn some of the practical principles of identity that will be helpful for understanding trans people. This might be new to you, or it might be review. We've designed this training for everyone, so if you are already familiar with these ideas and terminology, feel free to watch this segment with an educator's lens. Chances are, if you're knowledgeable, you're the person that everyone turns to when they need a lesson. Consider this way of explaining these concepts as just another tool in your toolbox. To start with, we know that as soon as someone finds out you're going to have a baby, what is the first thing they might ask? That's right, is it a boy or a girl? And in fact, our culture's commitment to gender and the ways in which we assume your sex will determine many of your life's outcomes continues on well past birth. You'll notice that I just said our culture, but really I mean my culture, because I don't know how your culture views gender. I am a white Canadian living in America, and I was born in the 1980s. Those facts are important because communities worldwide approach gender in thousands of different ways. And Indigenous nations here in what we now call North America also used to do gender very differently than we currently see in mainstream American culture. But here we are. So let's look at mainstream American culture. There are so many stereotypes associated with gender, all of which I'm sure you are well aware of. Men are assumed to be more physically strong and emotionally constrained. In contrast, women are believed to be more aesthetically oriented and emotional. That may be true for some men and some women, but it may be untrue for others. Unfortunately, those who lie somewhere outside of gender norms are often hurt by their peers, their families, mentors or teachers, and more. As we start to understand gender more broadly, and trans people specifically, it can be helpful first to examine the role that gender has played in your life. Is there a time when you might have been told to act more like a man or like a woman? Many boys in sports are told to man up if they experience an injury, and many girls are told to act more ladylike if they take up more room in conversation. Sometimes we don't even notice how gender is being reinforced all around us. So the way our culture views masculinity and femininity can start to feel normal or even natural. But the truth is, a lot of what we believe is normal around gender is actually taught to us in many different ways throughout our lives. Just as you may have been taught to act like a man and not cry, or act like a woman and be quieter. I often think about the parable of the two fish swimming in the ocean. One fish swims up to the other and says, "Hey man, how's the water?" And then the other fish is really confused and shakes his head and says, "What's water?" For most people who don't have to think about gender all the time, gender is the water, all around us and yet invisible in so many ways. If you can remember a time when you were punished or reprimanded for acting somehow outside the norms of gender, you can start to understand how hard it can be for transgender people to just navigate the world. Challenging those rigid definitions of man and woman can be difficult for anyone, and especially those who are transgender, non-binary, or gender non-conforming. Transgender people can challenge the expectations and norms associated with who we are and what we're supposed to do, like, be, and accomplish in our lives. I think about those expectations as lining up into 4 categories: sex assigned at birth, gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation. I call those the 4 pillars of identity. Let's start at the beginning. When we're born, or even before then in some cases, we are assigned a sex based on our visible anatomy, which in turn is assumed to reflect our chromosomal and genetic characteristics. Generally speaking, everyone is assigned a sex at birth, male or female. Because there are traditionally 2 options given, assigned sex can be considered a binary. We are issued a birth certificate and other documents with gender markers reflecting that sex, and are referred to with pronouns and other gendered language reflecting that sex. More broadly, this sex assignment often significantly shapes our upbringing and life experience. There have been some efforts in recent years to raise children without assigning them a sex at birth, or to try to minimize those secondary impacts of that assignment. And it is likely that what birth sex assignment means will continue to shift with the culture at large. Additionally, even though most people are assigned male or female at birth, there are many ways in which people are biologically somewhere in between male and female, either by having chromosomes that aren't XX or XY, by having a chromosome variation such as androgen insensitivity disorder, or by possessing anatomy that is outside of or in between traditional definitions of male or female. This is called being intersex. Next, we get to gender identity, which is our innate knowing of ourselves as being a man, a woman, or another gender. Everyone has a gender identity, including you. Someone is transgender when their gender identity does not align with their assigned sex at birth. Someone is cisgender if their gender identity does match their assigned sex at birth. We're going to take a tiny time out here to chat about the word cisgender. So to start with, in biology, the prefix trans means to cross over, like translucent or transparent, right? To see on the other side of something. And the prefix cis, C-I-S, means in alignment with. So that's the what of the word cisgender. Here's the why. For people like me who do education on transgender issues, there came to be a certain realization that happened over time. If we all have a gender identity, and we all have an assigned sex at birth, but only transgender people have a word that describes that interaction between the two, the silent assumption can be that there are transgender people over here, and then there are, that's right, normal people. So the word cisgender was created as a value-neutral way to describe people who are not transgender. So that's the why of the word cisgender. Now, most people, whether they are trans or cis, transgender or cisgender, still identify as either a man or a woman. So, for example, I was assigned female at birth and I'm a man. So I'm a transgender man. I'm transgender because there's a difference between my assigned sex at birth and my gender identity, and that gender identity is man. But some people, roughly a third of the transgender community, know themselves to be something other than man or woman. Neither of those categories is right for them. Typically, this is called non-binary. There are lots of other words used as well, such as genderqueer or agender. Now, the word non-binary is new, but it's important to note that people who have not felt themselves to be either man or woman have existed throughout all of written and oral history and are documented in every culture around the world. From tribes in Africa to Aboriginal Australians to First Nations people in Canada and Native Americans here in the US, living outside of a gender binary has been embraced and even celebrated. To be non-binary is not a trend or a fad. It might be an idea that's new to you, but it's not new to the world and its many cultures. Moving on. Gender expression is how we tell the world what our gender identity is. It's the physical manifestation of one's gender identity through clothing, hairstyle, voice, body shape, whether you use your hands when you talk, etc. Most people have a gender expression that lines up with their gender identity. If someone's a man, they are usually masculine. If someone's a woman, they are usually feminine. But if someone has a gender expression that is different than what is traditionally associated with their gender identity, they can be considered gender non-conforming. Finally, we get to sexual orientation, who you are physically and or emotionally attracted to. Most people are attracted to others who do not share their gender identity. This is called heterosexual or straight. Some people are attracted to others who do share their gender identity. That's referred to as gay or lesbian. Many people are attracted to others across the gender spectrum, and this has been called bisexual and is increasingly being referred to as pansexual. If someone is not interested in romantic relationships at all, they may identify as asexual or without a sexuality. This is also a good time to mention the word queer, which doesn't actually have one set definition. Broadly speaking, queer is used by people whose gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, or relationship structures are outside of the norm. It is a word that is still controversial, and not one you should ever use to describe someone unless it's a word they use for themselves. It also has a painful history for many, and not everyone in the LGBTQ community feels comfortable with it being used casually. These four pillars are all separate from each other. You can be a feminine man who's heterosexual or a bisexual woman who is masculine, but these identities also interact with each other in ways that can seem complicated, especially in the LGBTQ community. So let's finish mapping me on this chart. I was assigned female at birth, and I'm a man, so I'm transgender. I'm somewhere between the middle and masculine in terms of my gender expression, so I would not consider myself to be gender non-conforming. And I am attracted to men. So because I'm a man who is oriented toward other men, I'm gay. Those are the words I would use to describe myself. And if we were friends or if we were working together, those are the words I would ask you to use when you describe me. You will notice that I am a transgender man. So you wouldn't call me a transgender woman or a transgender female. Some famous transgender women are Laverne Cox and Janet Mock. You can see that my gender identity and expression is quite different from theirs. They are transgender women. I'm a transgender man. So those are the four pillars of identity. Next, you'll take a quick quiz to solidify your learning.